Welcome to the Postgame on the Michael Brooks Show with the great friend, mentor, journalist, scholar, Milton Allimadi. Thank you for sticking around for part of the Postgame.
Hey, my pleasure, bro.
Thank you so much. It's always such an honor to have you. We're here with the whole crew, each and every one of you. Welcome new patrons. Thank you all patrons who continue to go strong. We appreciate all of you. Let's start by taking a quick phone call out of the gate. And then we'll get to some sound. You're calling from a 845 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Michael, it's Lauren. How are you?
Hey, Lauren. How you doing? Thanks for calling.
I'm all right. I know I called earlier, Majority Report, but I can't stop plugging the Brake Light Clinic. So the Mid-Hudson Valley DSA is having a brake light clinic this Saturday in the city of Newburgh from 11 to 3 at the Ann Street Municipal Parking Lot. We're on Facebook. Come find us. Volunteer if you're in the area. Donate if you're not. And, yeah, that's it.
That's rad, Lauren. Thank you. We are going to try to visit up there sometime. I want to check out that DSA, see what you guys are cooking.
James Fenimore Cooper territory.
Yes. Thank you, Lauren.
All right. Night, Mike.
That's awesome, that brake light clinics. That's so practical and dope. You're calling from an 818 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, can you hear me, Michael?
Yes, I can hear you. I believe this is Dave from Jamaica.
Oh, what's up?
Jamaica, New
I'm
York,
glad you
or
had
Jamaica.
Jamaica.
Oh,
Dave is calling from Jamaica.
I'm glad you had on Milton. That was very educational.
He's still here.
Kind of new information. Yeah,
He's still here.
Appreciate that.
You can speak to Milton.
How are you?
I was going to say, what are the lessons we can learn from that? I can't believe I'm messing up the name. I guess I'm nervous. But what are the lessons we can learn from him, given that with the power structure that exists in the world, when leaders like that pop up, their life expectancy is low.
Yes.
So how do you get that least get the system in place before you get whacked?
That's a good question. That's the constant, question.
Mm-hmm.
If you know you have a potential over Sankara, should you not reveal that? Should you not reveal that potential because you know you're going to be whacked? I mean, obviously, that is the reason of doing it, in order to intimidate others and hold them back. But, I mean, at some point, even in Congo, we've seen changes because it just built up to a critical point that it cannot be sustained anymore. And the system, it may not transform into what, ultimately you want to see, but it's a transition. Congo is still a mess, but Congo is in a far better space than it was under Mobutu Sese Seko. So that's one way I can see it. I think Uganda is definitely going to transition. Sudan is definitely going to transition. So I think the thing is to, not be intimidated. And I think now with the modern social media communication, you can't suppress an idea whose time has come. That's how I see it.
That's. Do we have Dave's sound drop ready? Because that would have worked so well. Dave, can you wait for? We have a sound drop for you, which I think actually complements that. Do we have it? All right, Dave.
I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Oh my!
I actually thought we were going to go with the smile one, but that works. I mean, I think the idea. I don't know. All right, do we have the smile one? Because I think Dave always needs it. All right, Dave, my message to you. Flying at the dread and smile, you're in Jamaica. Sometimes Dave is very. Sometimes we call Dave the morose Jamaican. So we want to cheer him up.
Also, I guess another question.
Yes.
As you brought up the history of how China in the past helped with and the Soviet Union
Yes.
helped with the backing of these revolutionary regimes in Africa back in those days.
Correct.
What is your thoughts on modern day China now, which is kind of more
that's a really good question.
neo-colonial and
Wow.
a little fascist too,
Yeah.
for Milton and Michael?
Right. Modern day China is now a global imperial power as well. It's using Africa's resources to build China's economy, China's manufacturing, and it's being very successful in it. And of course, being highly resented by the U.S. and the West of the rest, because the U.S. and the West of the rest think it's their monopoly to exploit Africa, and they don't want to see somebody else exploiting Africa. Now, if African leadership could get it together, they could actually play off China against the West and the U.S. and extract the best concessions. But ultimately, as Samir Amin said, he was one of my favorite African political economists, just died 2 years ago. He says that what Africa needs is to say, China, if you want resources, we'll give it to you, but build factories in Africa as well. So you're not just taking the raw materials. And that's the challenge we're still struggling with. Hopefully the younger generation of Africans will start making those demands.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I just echo and learn from that. But I think it's very important to understand China, because some people, and Amir actually, Samin did suggest that China did need to be, he at one point even said that China, Russia, and the Europeans needed to be a counterweight to the United States because of how reckless and dangerous the United States could be, particularly, I would say, in fact, in the Bush era, but even under Obama with how drones were deployed. I mean, look at the global precedent of that. But I think that it's some people get, I mean, at a certain point, I think ultimately if you have socialist politics, you have to move beyond power politics. And China is absolutely a new imperial player, and the torture's being passed. And in some ways, an advantage I think China provides is there's less bullshit. Yeah. China shows up and they say, okay, you want to do business? Let's do business. Here's money. Here's this. Okay. Yeah. So it's less hypocritical, and things like the Belt and Road Initiative definitionally will create a lot of jobs.
Right.
On the other hand, and this is what some people on the left don't like when I say, and this is one thing we have to be real about the United States for all of its many flaws and imperfections. There is not a show in China streaming on YouTube where Milton and I are sitting the equivalents of us in China saying that the foreign policy of this country is abominable.
Right. And that
so
makes
the
a huge
United
difference.
States has the United States has an openness, and again, there's a whole other critique of U.S. human rights organizations, all 100%. But when a guy like Gasek, I believe his name is, he's the head of strategy for the beverage union. And, you know, I saw him speak recently, and this goes back to Brazil, but it could be anything. And he just went to see Lula, and he's railing against what we have done in Brazil and elsewhere, and talking about a global labor movement. And still in the United States, there is an independent, you can do that.
Right.
There is no analog in China. So again, on one hand, less bullshit with China, more resources, less hypocrisy, but it's all imperialism. And then on the other hand, there isn't the move to exploit contradictions in the same way, because we do have a obviously much more relatively open system domestically. And people who deny that are being delusional.
Absolutely.
So I think those are all the things that you got to put into play.
I want to add one thing, too,
please.
Based on your observation on the United States. I have a friend who is wealthy. He's actually a billionaire. He hasn't shared any of it with me, but...
What? but
we
I was about to say, hey, man, you want him to patron up the show?
But we
didn't even hook you
we
up.
have good conversations, but here's what he said.
Hey, a lot of people do good conversations.
Here's what he volunteered without me even asking. Milton,
yes,
there's going to be a major problem in this country. The wealth gap is unsustainable.
Absolutely.
He said, when I started making my money, there was the people that were wealthy, there was a solid middle class. And I used to be a part of that middle class. But now it's just me and my folks and all the rest. There's nothing in between.
Yep.
And if they're calculating that they're going to be able to use the armed forces to suppress the uprising, they're gravely mistaken. This is coming from a billionaire. who has his own island, by the way. I won't say where because you might be able to narrow down and know who it is. But this is a comment that
You
he
want to ask him?
volunteered.
We could podcast from his island.
I
mean,
will-
let's just
I will
start small.
try. I will try. No, I will try. I thought this was an interesting thing to say. I wanted to follow up actually, because obviously he sees where the country is going,
Yes.
and he realizes that this tremendous gap is the trend. He says, if this trend continues, it's going to blow out.
Well, it is, and there's no doubt about that.
Right.
Dave, thank you for the call as always.
I want to give you one gift before I go. So, so Dave Rubin from Jamaica again. So, Michael, I judge my success by the ill will I generate in others. So, that's how I do my thing. All right, guys. Later.
He's a good man.
judge my success by the ill will of other people. That's so fucking good. So I was talking with Buju Banton about and you say boom boom bye bye and it's dialogue.
Boom, bye, bye.
I feel so bad because
Bye,
I
bye.
love Buju and I want to forgive him and move on, but I do think Jamaican Dave would speak to Buju in 1993 and say like, I'm gay married. You want to burn gay people. Why can we can talk about this, but the left won't have conversations. Oh my God.
All right, guys. Later.
Dave, you're the best. Bye. All right, well, I want to play just a couple pieces of sound before we have to let you go. But first, I think this is very, very important. I hear a lot of talk, and again, I gave a commentary a couple of weeks ago where I contrasted very explicitly Sanders and Warren and why I think Bernie Sanders' overall history of foreign policy and solidarity with countries like Nicaragua in the 1980s and, of course, his anti-Vietnam activism, down to the fact that he is a leader in trying to stop the genocide in Yemen today.
Right. That's critical.
Is profoundly distinct. Has he been wrong on certain votes? Yes. Has he said things on drones that I strongly disagree with? Yes. But I do, and this is where I want to send, a message. I would like him to follow Tulsi Gabbard in saying that we need to pardon Edward Snowden and all charges related to Julian Assange and this journalism is a horrifying attack on free press. And I don't care what you think of Julian Assange.
Right.
You need to focus on what actually is happening. Now, that being said, I hear a lot of talk that, that Bernie is not the real peace candidate. And I've explained to you a couple of weeks ago that Bernie is the only candidate with anything approximating an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial position, which is genuinely felt, and that he has an understanding of global solidarity, not just isolation. And now in this speech, to move on, and Kyle Kalinske clipped this with the excellent title, Bernie swings an axe at the military-industrial complex. He is talking about cutting this whole apparatus, which if you don't actually take cuts to it, you don't actually stop these arms manufacturers, you don't actually stop this whole gravy train, which is the reason that we're still in Afghanistan, the reason that, the self-interest of these companies. Don't be surprised that the, basic foundational greed that affects national security, quote unquote, just like anything else. This is Bernie Sanders at Move On.
There are many enormously important issues, including the need for Medicare for all, forgiving student debt and making public colleges and universities tuition free, raising the minimum wage, criminal justice reform, immigration reform, and addressing the global crisis of climate change, among other issues. But there is one issue out there that does not get the attention that it deserves, a very big idea, and that is the need to stop endless wars and to bring the world together to find diplomatic solutions to international conflicts. Today, we are preparing to send soldiers to Afghanistan who were not even born on September 11, 2001. We have spent $5 trillion on the wars that have taken place since, not just in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also in the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, a horrific war.
Yep.
And now we have some of the same people that got us into the war in Iraq trying to start a military conflict with Iran. We have got to stop endless wars. We have got to cut military spending.
Boom.
There it is. There it is. It needs to be cut.
Recently, I have been attacked because of my opposition to unnecessary wars. I make no apologies as a young man for opposing the war in Vietnam. I make no apologies as a congressman for doing everything that I could to prevent the disastrous war in Iraq. And I am proud right now to have led the effort to get the United States out of an unauthorized, unconstitutional war in Yemen.
Right.
And let me be absolutely clear, with the Trump administration proposing to send 10,000 troops to confront Iran, I will do everything in my power to stop a war with Iran. It is time to bring our troops home from Afghanistan and Iraq. It is time for Congress to assert its constitutional prerogative and repeal the 2001 and 2002 authorizations that have been used as a blank check to send U.S. troops into harm's way. But it is not enough to just end military interventions. It is time to end the entire policy of endless wars. Using war and militarism as the first and only foreign policy tool has undermined the United States' moral authority, caused allies to question our ability to lead, drained our treasury, and corroded our own democracy.
Of course.
When we end endless wars, we can finally begin to ask ourselves, how do we move toward a global community in which people have decent jobs, adequate food, clean water, education, healthcare, and the housing that they need?
Milton.
What can I say? I bet you he's going to be probably the only candidate that's calling for a cut in military spending.
That I know of. I mean, I've heard Tulsi make some signals. I have to say, Sanders is the only one to vote against all three Trump military budgets, and also he's talking about getting rid of these authorizations
Right.
for a force in 2001 and 2002. Those are the authorizations by which an entire global war that has hit everywhere from Yemen to Somalia to Pakistan, in addition to all of the places that everybody knows, drones, special forces strikes, all of the civilian casualties that are ongoing, and even the airstrikes in Syria, those two authorizations, they haven't been updated. And Libya
now,
happened without congressional
And
authorization.
now Iran. Looming,
And now is right.
Venezuela looming, I mean, he's courageous. And it comes, I think, from being honest and authentic, And I think most politicians are politicians, right? How do I get to that coveted office? What do I need to say? So I think all the candidates need to be asked, what is your position on cutting military spending? All of them need to face that question,
And else, and that you can't, even if you're pivoting and starting, it goes, if you have good policies domestically. Look, if LBJ wasn't involved in a genocide in Vietnam, he would be a great president. He did great things on healthcare, on civil rights, on the environment. The trouble is, I don't feel comfortable saying, except for a genocide in Vietnam. It was called butter at home, guns abroad.
Right.
So you have people now who are getting really woke on Medicare for all and the financial institutions, and that's beautiful. But what he said is absolutely true too, that you can't, how could you possibly durably sustain even enlightened advances that are unbelievably necessary here while we continue to drain and lay waste to the world?
And, this is just another example of why it's so important that Bernie comes from this socialist tradition, because that's why he is able to be so good on the domestic front and on the international front, rather than just going by whatever becomes popular at the moment.
Right.
I mean, it's such an important aspect of Bernie's campaign and his message and, what he's been doing for the past 30, 40 years
Right.
that we cannot overstate enough.
As we said earlier, time and everything else caught up with him. He's
Yes.
been consistent.
Yes.
At one point, he was seen as this joke, right? Somebody who could not be taken seriously. He was talking about unrealistic expectations. These things can never be attained. So it's not part of serious conversation. Look where we are today.
Because he was unrealistic, and of course, that is the thread of whether you're talking about Nkrumah or Sanders
Yep.
or FDR or Sankara. I mean, there's these huge differences. But
No, I agree
I also
with you.
love the Castro story, right? That some foreign journalist said something like, "It's totally unrealistic what you're talking about with the Cuban people. What would you do if they asked for the moon?" And Castro said, "Well, we would need to get them the moon." It's like, yeah, that's your job.
On Nkrumah, getting rid of the British Empire in Ghana.
That
What,
wasn't
are you
a realistic
crazy?
expectation. That wasn't somebody sitting around, I would
Yeah.
imagine, and saying, "Hey, you know what we ought to do as just a kind of small, realistic
Or
thing."
Mandela.
Yeah.
We're going to lock you up, and that's the end of it. Right?
Right.
And they locked him up. He became even much more powerful globally when he was locked up.
And by the way, incidentally, when we speak about age and Bernie, Nelson Mandela was older than Bernie. Very good president. So let's bear
And-
that in mind as well.
And also on Mandela, the Rivonia trial. If you haven't heard that, when he made a statement in his defense, that is on YouTube. If you go YouTube, The Guardian posted it. So it's on YouTube, posted by The Guardian. The sound quality is not that great, but if you listen to it, you would know at that time that this man is going somewhere. The way he broke down the whole narrative, he said, okay, I'm being tried as somebody who is now advocating for armed resistance. And it's true, but it was not by accident or choice. I analyzed all the options, and I studied all the great minds in military history. And that's how I came to this conclusion. And I made specific rules that we are not going to hit civilian targets, only buildings identified with the state. And then why is the other reason that I'm actually pushing in this direction? Because look at the stats. Look at the black schools. Look at the income gap. Look at the healthcare statistics. It's just remarkable. I think he said it and said, you know what? I think he prepared it saying, if I'm executed, at least let me leave this as my final statement. So if you haven't heard it, please go on YouTube and listen to that.
Please. We'll take a few minutes now, and then Milton has to go. But I do want to just play these two clips. Speaking of heroes and political imprisonment, Lula did an hour-long interview with Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept, and he's been doing a wave of interviews. And if you're watching this, I'm sure you're already quite familiar with the fact that the only thing I'll say, I always re-review the basics of this case, but it is incredible that if you read any news report on Lula, they will still say he's in jail for money laundering or something related to Lava Jato, the car wash investigation. And literally, this is not a debate. He is in jail because there is a claim that he took a middle-class seaside apartment. That evidence of that claim is testimony from one executive who was held in preventative detention. So in other words, did not give this testimony until they could not leave prison
Right.
unless they did that
Interesting.
testimony. That's what he's in jail for. You can believe whatever you want about this guy's supposed corruption, but you cannot claim that he is in jail related to these big melodramatic charges. He's not.
Interesting.
That is a objective fact. And I will add that it is extraordinary to me that with literally hundreds of millions of dollars of resources and the backing of the U.S. Justice Department and the entirety of the legal apparatus, political, oligarchic, and all of the media forces in Brazil, that all they have found on Lula is some ridiculous apartment case, which would have never passed muster in any, I mean, again, I'll just be really objective here. That would have gotten thrown out in the United States or France or whatever. Sorry, it would. Is extraordinary. So look it up. Be real about the history.
Extraordinary, but not surprising.
Yes, but like, right. Extraordinary, but not surprising. But I want to play some clips of this interview because as what I like that Greenwald did is Greenwald also said, look, in addition to this position he's in, I say obviously as a political prisoner, this is a guy who actually knows how to win as a social democrat in a modern context and has the directness of communicating to people. So we're going to play 2 clips. If you're listening, I'll summarize what he says a little bit, but best to watch because it is in subtitles. We have 3 clips. The second one is just sort of funny. We'll indulge ourselves. But the first one is on what appeals to people about authoritarian leadership. And I really like how Lula responds to this. He quotes a writer from Mozambique. Let's watch this.
Agora, veja, nós tivemos período muito extraordinário na América Latina. Período de mais crescimento, de mais distribuição de renda, de mais inclusão social na América Latina, aconteceu de 2000 a 2014, com a eleição de Kirchner, Lagos, Cristina,
Kirchner,
Lula, Evo Morales, Chaves, Rafael Correa. Foi momento de ouro da América Latina. Agora você está vivendo momento da extrema-direita que estão fracassando de forma absurda. O Macri é desastre na Argentina e ele é a solução. Tem livro...
Por que isso está acontecendo?
Tem um livro do Mia Couto, que é grande escritor moçambicano, que tem uma frase que é o seguinte: em tempo de terror, escolhemos monstros para nos proteger.
That is really powerful.
Wow.
So if you're just listening to this, he summarizes that we already know that whatever, it wasn't perfect, there are problems, it was related to a commodities boom, blah, blah, blah. From 2000 to 2014, left-wing governments in Latin America achieved incredible gains for people from Bolivia, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela. And also, incidentally, in relation to the Nkrumah conversation, and another reason I think there was a backlash to this is that certainly Chavez and also Lula and all of them were also working along the lines of creating a regional bloc as well, which is always vital in any project. Now, this is clip B. I can't resist because this is just funny. This is Glenn Greenwald is really trying to zero in here on what happened and particularly why people would flip from, say, voting for Lula and Rousseff, then voting for Bolsonaro, or voting for Obama and then voting for Trump. I actually think I'm not playing this just because it's funny, although mostly it is why. But I do think people also have to remember that for all these ideological conversations, sometimes people win or lose. And I know I always say this because they're good or not at politics.
True.
Barack Obama, I have totally different politics than Barack Obama. He's undeniably a profoundly powerful politician. Anybody would deny that as being ridiculous.
True.
JFK, right-wing Cold Warrior in my mind. Incredible politician.
True.
So Lula is going to talk about Hillary Clinton here, and he's going to drop another dose of reality about why something might have happened in 2016, and it's quite funny.
Eu conheço razoavelmente bem a Hillary Clinton. Era muito fácil você encontrar uma pessoa mais popular do que ela. Para ganhar. Ela não era uma figura simpática. Então, se deveu ao fato dele ter discurso correto.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
I love that he just said, Glenn, I knew Hillary Clinton pretty well.
Unvarnished.
Yeah.
Wow.
It would have been very easy to find someone more popular than her. She does not have an appealing personality.
When was this interview?
2 weeks ago.
Wow.
From prison. There's his guard, his thug is right there in the corner watching him. And I just also want to say for people who, and maybe I should, maybe we should be more attentive to this. But if you are going to, first of all, he praises Christina Kirchner a lot in this interview, which is one thing. But if you're going to get into, oh, Lula's dismissing an important woman politician. Lula at another point in the interview, and clearly does not have the politics of Angela Merkel, but he mentions Angela Merkel and he says, Angela Merkel, a very strong politician. So he's talking about Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And that's a beautiful burn. Now, there's one more section here that we'll play. And this is important, I think, because this explains the other dimension. And usually we talk about class as an economic function, which it is in Marxian terms, but it is also related with these social prejudices, and it's so exemplified in Brazil. And Lula is going to talk about why, even though the rich did well under him, they had a problem with what his government achieved.
Interesting.
Veja, Glenn, nós começamos a nossa entrevista, eu comecei dizendo que o grande problema do PT não foi o erro do PT. O grande problema do PT foram os acertos do PT. Ou seja, na América Latina, toda vez que apareceu um presidente que tentou fazer política social, ele foi derrubado. Todas as vezes. A elite brasileira e a elite de outros países não aceitam uma política de desenvolvimento que tem inclusão social. Então, o PT conseguiu fazer, isso não é dito por mim, é dito pela ONU. O PT conseguiu fazer a maior política de inclusão social da história deste país. É importante lembrar que no nosso governo foi o único momento na história em que os mais pobres tiveram um crescimento percentual acima dos mais ricos. Não que os ricos não ganharam, mas que os pobres cresceram percentualmente mais. Foi a única vez e começou a incomodar. Você deve ter ouvido no aeroporto do Galeão, no aeroporto de Congonhas, o aeroporto parece uma rodoviária. Tá cheio de pobre aqui andando, gente que não sabia nem frequentar aeroporto.
Então, porque...
That the rich said the airports are starting to look like a bus station with all of these poor people around. That when we talk about backlash politics, and he also does talk about the workers who get seduced by fascism, and that quote is so powerful. When people are terrified, they elect monsters to protect them. People need to take that in, and the economic reasons, and then the reasons of just base bigotry, which are very prevalent in Brazil. Obviously, he talked about that. He said at one point, he goes, Glenn, we ended slavery 100 years ago. He says that. But the other part too of this identity politics is the resentment of the rich. Particularly, I must say, in a place like Latin America, is very prominent of the notion that even if we still have all of our privileges, that others how dare you, and how dare Lula, who doesn't have a finger because he's a metal worker, and apparently, I wouldn't know obviously, but he speaks in improper Portuguese, but is, by the way, more intelligent, more charismatic, more popular, more strategic than them. They hate that.
Than all the elite, right?
And who got to be at the airport. So I just wanted to share that. I thought that was very powerful.
That's just great. This is my first time watching this. It's tremendous.
It's an honor to have you. Thank you so much. I know we have to let you go. I hope you'll come back again very soon, please.
Of course. Always happy to be here.
And please, we tell all the ways. I know, obviously, you're on Twitter, which people can follow, but we tell all the ways that people can follow and connect with you. And
at Allimadi. Please follow me on Twitter. Anybody that wants to send me an email, mallimadi@gmail.com. MALLIMAD like David I @gmail.com.
And Black Star News.
BlackStarNews.com.
BlackStarNews.com.
Yes.
And we are going to talk one day. We have to make a Milton Allimadi podcast happen. We must. We absolutely must.
We shall collaborate. Stay strong, bro.
Thank you so much. All right, let's take a... Okay, yeah, you can... All right. Yeah, we put music for like 10 seconds? Yeah. All right, we're going to take a brief break, and I'm going to say goodbye to Milton properly, and then we're going to get Ben Burgess on the phone for the debunk. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Guys, I mean, Milton, I just have to say briefly, I met Milton Allimadi. I used to go on TV. Nobody had any idea. I was like, it's such a stupid way to measure it, but I maybe had, I don't know, 1,000 followers or something on Twitter. And I was, I would sub for Sam sometimes. And I started going on and doing guest spots on something called Arise TV, which was a Nigerian global news network. And it was actually very fun. I'm sure nobody was watching it. I have no idea how the thing even worked. There's a lot of these cable companies that you get randomly invited to be on, and I speculate, and I'm being an asshole a little bit, but when I look at some of these operations and the amount of money that it takes to have the real estate they're in, and the fact that there's no way anybody's watching it, and if they're not funded by governments, I'm like, is this a giant money laundering operation? But that's just my speculation. I mean, I have no idea. But one day I was in the green room, and I noticed this, first thing I noticed, very, very well-dressed gentleman, very carrying himself very well. And it's Milton Allimadi. We struck up a conversation. And actually, it's so funny. I have another friend of mine. Two really good friends in the Arise green room. And I also met Stephen Baldwin once. So it was quite a green room. And James Carville. But anyways, James Carville really dug my segment. Yeah. But now I'm digressing. Ben Burgess, he's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. It's an incredible book that everybody should be reading, and it's doing incredibly well. Let's keep it climbing up the Amazon charts. We share a publisher, Zero Books. My book is getting a hell of a lot closer, and next week I am going to announce, along with this new co-host, the name and title of the book. So coming along. Ben Burgess, welcome to the debunk, my friend.
So the new co-host isn't just you wearing a wig like Anthony Perkins dressed up as Granny Bates at the end of Psycho, is it?
No, but that's a weird reference. I was thinking you were going to try to go for a Crowder jab.
Yeah, I was going to say
I thought it was a Crowder joke.
Crowder's trying to liquidate all of his his cross-dressing outfits.
Yeah. I'm actually writing Crowder to see if I could have all of his addresses because of his
Might need to save some money soon.
Yeah, Steve might need to be, and I guess he might be ending his totally not in any way bigoted or terrifyingly psychologically revealing cross-dressing bits.
Yeah, no, that's good. I noticed that YouTube has gone through his videos and decided that apparently none of them were as bad as that video that we did for Zero Books, mildly criticizing Ben Shapiro.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, capitalism and fascism, brother. But we got to get to tonight's debunk. What is the debunk, Ben? What are we debunking? What are we talking about? It's a different one. I believe it involves a guy that I don't know, but I from what I've seen, I mean, I don't have the same politics, but I like him. It doesn't, usually we're debunking a lot of real cretins here. This is a different ball game tonight.
Yeah, no, this guy is definitely not a cretin. So this is Destiny, who is a Twitch stream gamer who has debated a lot of right wingers and has actually really done some very good work in that regard. But as you say, he doesn't have our politics. And the other night, I had a very friendly and civil and constructive conversation with him about socialism, and you could see that on the Serfs, the YouTube channel, the Serfs.
I will be appearing on the Serfs next week.
Nice.
Good guys, good Canadians.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so.
And in the clip we're about to hear, he's making an argument, or really he's making an objection to the kind of consideration that I bring up a lot, I've heard you bring up a lot, about why one of the most important reasons why we need to democratize the economy which is about the ecological impact of the current economic system. And I think that it's an important thing to look at, not because, as you say, this is a much better person than most of the people that we debunk, but because it's inherently interested and because this is an incredibly important subject.
Absolutely. So let's play this clip, and then we'll throw it back to you. And this is a Twitch stream, so you guys are playing video games together or something?
Well, he's playing video games. I'm almost 40. I think the last video game I played was Frogger.
Okay, because I've been on Twitch and seen Twitch, but I don't totally understand the setup. But anyways, go for it.
Sure, but like socialism, like co-ops or whatever, none of that has anything to do with the environment either, though, right? Like, there's no reason to think that like a co-op or whatever would do anything more to address environmental issues than a free market.
Well, maybe not. Like, here's why I think that it might help. I think that if you have large numbers of people, who are directly affected, oftentimes by these, by pollution, for example, by these questions, who are in a position to have democratic input into decision making, especially. I mean, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I think that there's an estimate that there's some really small number of companies in the world that are directly responsible for some massive chunk of global climate change.
Sure.
And so if you have one of those companies, even if it wasn't nationalized, even if it was run as a private cooperative, if you're talking about like many thousands of employees, and they don't necessarily have the sort of huge stake in the existing practices of the company that they would have if they were like major stockholders in a private company, then I think that I'm much more optimistic. The more democratic input there is into the system and people's ability to say, hey, do we want to be able to expand a little bit faster, or do we want our grandchildren to be able to live on this planet? That I'm much more confident that
you say that now, but like we already have a democracy, and there's already what percentage of Americans that don't even believe that climate change is real. Like, these would be the same people in the workplaces voting on whether or not we should do it, right? Like, Trump said literally like that climate change is a hoax from China. Like, all of the people that voted for him, which were a lot of worker type people, right? The whole Rust Belt that kind of swung for him. These would be the people in charge of voting in their workplaces on whether or not we should do something about climate change. So I mean, I guess I'm not fully sold on the idea, and this is where kind of like I'm very inflammatory on Twitter. I don't know which tweets you read, but like I said multiple times, like workers are dumb or whatever. I don't necessarily mean that like workers are like a class, like a genetically bred to be stupid people or whatever. But I think in general, like people seem to be like pretty clueless about issues. And this isn't just workers. This is like all sorts of different people for a variety of reasons too, right? Whether we don't fund education, whether you're in a lower class and you didn't have time to pay attention to that shit, for whatever reason. That the idea that like the same people that voted for Trump, if they were in charge of co-ops, they would just magically be more aware or more caring about climate issues. I don't know. I find that really, really hard to believe.
I just have to say, I continue to like Destiny from the interactions I've had with him, and I am going to continue in the vein of my meditation retreat, but I am just going to say, not good. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing, by the way, that's worth flagging about that I didn't really think about until I watched this again in preparation for the segment, is that he is really overstating working class support for Trump in the Rust Belt. Right. That like this is a very minor point, but if you actually look at the election results in places like Michigan and Wisconsin, it's not that there was some great working class surge of support for Trump. It's mostly just that traditional Democratic constituencies didn't come out and vote for Hillary. So that's just that's a small point, but I think it's one worth emphasizing if we're going to make big generalizations about people's views about climate change and other things. But I think that it is an important, it's a really important point to address because, the global climate change is one of the most important reasons that we need to move towards a more democratized economic system. And I think there are a few, in the moment when I was responding to it, actually, your first guest, Hassan Piker, when he was talking about the debate on his stream last night, he kind of faulted me for going a little too easy on him at this point, on Destiny at this point.
Yes, you should have ripped. I like Destiny. You know what? I can be a good politician. I like Destiny. Destiny's a friend of mine. He's a great guy. You should have fucking torn his head off for that shit, dude.
Yeah. So what I did point out, which is an important point to make, is that any strategy that anybody could propose for doing anything about global climate change is going to have to involve having a majority, convincing the majority of the population this is a serious problem. And a lot of progress has already been made on that front, because unless you have a massive majoritarian coalition in favor of doing something about it, then regardless of the economic system, nothing's going to happen. But under socialism, you do have more levers of power that you can use in order to do something, because under capitalism, the vast majority of the power structure is not up for election. We like the general public or even the employees don't get to elect the CEO of ExxonMobil. And a good point that Hassan did make in his commentary on it, which I did refer to, like you could hear it in the clip, but maybe I soft pedaled the point, is that very oftentimes the employees of these companies are actually themselves directly impacted by these bad environmental practices. Think about fracking and and what fracking does to like groundwater in communities where the people who actually work for these companies live. And I think that's absolutely true. Now, we do need to disaggregate that from subtler environmental impacts, like just sort of gradually eroding the ozone layer, where you don't necessarily have that immediate incentive for employees, even in a worker-owned company, to go against these practices. But even there are a few things that are really worth hammering on. One of those is that in the more people that you have who are able to make this decision, and the less direct financial stake each of them has in maintaining these practices, the better your chances of doing something about it. And especially because oftentimes, when coal miners, for example, have this tremendous incentive not to want to support regulations that would lead to their jobs going away, it's because the alternatives under the existing system are you have the job that you have now, or you have an uncertain future that might involve living in poverty. And so if we change those options, so people had more choices, they weren't afraid of living in poverty and not having any job at all if they transitioned to some other line of work, then that would be less true. And then the last point I want to make about this is one that Bhaskar Sankara makes in his excellent new book, The Socialist Manifesto, which is that if we nationalized banking as part of a transition to a more democratic economy, then public banks, we could set as a matter of public policy when we were looking at which kinds of cooperative enterprises public banks gave starter loans to, what the environmental impacts are going to be, and that's something that's like very direct that we could do to curb these issues that there's no equivalent that we can do under capitalism.
100%. I just want to add two things though. All right. So one, I think it's a really common belief that a lot of people have, but first, complicating the numbers, right? Like, no, Donald Trump was not, he was able to make statistically significant inroads in geographically vital areas, right? So we already know that. But no, his base is not working class. In fact, his base has a higher than average national income. And if we talk about working class properly, which would mean covering every single member of the working class across all demographics, overwhelmingly voted against Trump, so that doesn't hold water. Then, being informed, like we got to complicate that, and also not just because it's like, oh, you can't say that, and let's be politically correct. There's plenty of people across class backgrounds that are not quote unquote informed, right? That's true. But then what does informed actually mean? Paulo Freire was a big influence on me. He wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he was a Brazilian educator, worked in the 60s and 70s, and he educated like people who were illiterate, because of lack of schooling and things like that. And he would do things like teach them to read by using the newspaper and actually engaging them in the things that were affecting their lives and depriving them. And he said, like, it's not like people don't understand the structures that inhibit them. So when people say something like that, I literally don't know what that means, because I'm very willing to say that somebody is being dumb or off base, regardless of where they're coming from. It's not like, oh, don't say that. But on the flip side, if your definition of informed is, well, this amount of people know who the Senate Majority Leader is and blah, 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 that's not informed. That doesn't mean you have any understanding of the actual forces that are driving politics and economics. And I will say, in my anecdotal experience, a lot of people from working class backgrounds definitely have a much more innate understanding of that stuff. And that's not because they're better people or more moral or whatever. It's just because if you live in a certain way, you have to fucking understand institutions more. That's just reality.
Yeah,
your daily life
experience shoved in your face.
Yeah, you're dealing with this stuff. It's totally unmediated. And then the second point I would say is, like, if your starting point, like, I agree with you, people do need to accept and understand the climate crisis to act on it. But if your starting point of why we're not doing something about the climate crisis is people don't believe the science versus Exxon, you have the wrong starting point of analysis. And in fact, I would argue that while public opinion is 100% necessary, you could get to a point, if you don't have actual mobilization and a power change, you could have 99% of the population accepting the science and having the right view, and it will make not a goddamn bit of difference, because powerful multinational companies and our entire economy is designed on fossil fuels. And that doesn't fucking matter whether or not you are, and again, let's be real here. We're all, we're not climate scientists. We read in the popular literature and we make smart assessments, but that's not the point. And even if you're really preoccupied with people being misinformed on the science, well, I got to tell you, the reason they are most likely is because Exxon and Chevron and DuPont secretly funded scientists and fake organizations to generate lies and propaganda to misinform the public. So even if you're hung up on, well, these people just don't know the numbers, well, I'm sorry, my friend, you got to go back to the capitalism again. It's unescapable. People's beliefs and public opinion is a second order thing. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And really, I think this is like what it is. This is, I think, a pretty common view for like a certain kind of liberal who might,
Yes.
like even people like, Destiny, who, like has a lot of good, progressive.
He has legitimately
views.
has a lot of good politics. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, but like a lot of people who see the world through more of that liberal kind of lens, ultimately, it's a very idealist way of seeing the world. The same way that a lot of conservative views are very idealist, like in the philosophical sense of idealism, like they have like that ideas are primary, that like the sort of source of the problem is people having bad ideas in their heads rather than the fundamental point of analysis being material. And this is really important. And like, I think this is actually a pretty simple, pretty straightforward illustration of that, because it's one thing to say, of course, yes, that is bad and it does contribute to the problem, and it's hard, because obviously in order to mobilize people to do anything about it, they have to realize that climate change, is really happening and is a problem, and et cetera. But the fact that people have this wrong idea that like there's whatever percentage of the public it is that believes that it's not real, like even if you want to be like they're too gullible, whatever, okay, but as you said, that's a second order thing. The question isn't like, oh, should they be better at like sorting through media to tell when they're being lied to or whatever. The question is, who told them this lie, right? Why is it that they right. believe that they have this bad idea in particular? And that's because, as you say, ExxonMobil and Fox News and there's this extremely well-funded propaganda machine with many heads that has been relentlessly dedicated to pushing this particular lie.
That's it. And that has to be your starting point. I mean, yeah, I mean, people look up the tobacco industry as another example of this. I mean, your starting point must be where the power is. And the power is not in regular people, having bad beliefs or not understanding something. It is a problem, but it is not the origins of anything. It isn't. Period. Ben, as always, much appreciated. You'll be back in studio next week, I believe, along with Bhaskar. Doubleheader.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
All right, brother. Thank you. Give them an argument, logic for the left. All right, we got to we have a few more things to get to. I might try to take one more call, but this is important. Relating back to the earlier segment, Bernie's incredible. So some people have a problem with like endorsing early, which I just find it's goofy. If I was a member of like the Senate or the House, and there was like some specific, honestly, if I was a member of Congress, I might sit and say, though I probably wouldn't do this because frankly, again, the stakes are just too high. But I might say, you know what, Bernie, I want another Lula letter. And then I will come and officially endorse you. Right? Or I want you to back me on some vital piece of infrastructure spending I need in my district or my state. If you play the role that we play, at least in my estimation, if you have the unique capacity to elect the candidate that's clearly the best from the perspective of the politics you have, I don't see the advantage in playing some pretend game with, first of all, pretending to you. It would be a lie. If I was saying I don't have my mind made up, that's dishonest as hell. I was always, if Bernie wasn't in the race, I would be supporting Elizabeth Warren, not nearly as enthusiastically, but I would absolutely be supporting her. She would have my vote, and I would tell you that she had my vote. And Bernie was going to be in the race. As soon as he got in the race, I'm voting for Bernie Sanders. I don't see a need to play some pretend game, and I'm totally willing, as I've certainly give Warren credit on great domestic policies, occasionally give Tulsi credit on foreign policy stuff, and even other ones. I mean, I did a clip of Cory Booker. He gave an excellent answer on religion. It was excellent. It's fine. But I support Bernie Sanders. And one of the reasons that I support Bernie Sanders, as this tweet points out, is that in 2017, he was the only member of the Democratic caucus in the United States Senate to vote against Iran sanctions. The only one. So who voted for it, including of people running? Elizabeth Warren voted for Iran sanctions. Michael Bennet voted for Iran sanctions. Cory Booker voted for Iran sanctions. Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Christian Gillibrand. Now I'll steel man it, as they say, for you. It was a bill that included sanctions also on Russian individuals. So one argument that you will hear from some people is like, well, they didn't want the Iran sanctions, but the Russian sanctions are more important because of all of this fixation with Russia. And I think I have a lot of credibility built up as somebody who has never defended Russia or Russian foreign policy and has never even dismissed, as ridiculously overplayed as Mueller was, not for a second should that investigation have not happened. Not for a second is there not crony and oligarchic relationships between people around Trump and Russians. And by the way, Emiratis and Saudis and Israelis and the oligarchs that run this country. But if you thought that symbolic, meaningless sanctions package, which incidentally, even as I don't defend Russia and I recognize that Russia has its own toxic foreign policy in its own sphere, no, I don't want to instigate with Russia. I don't want to have conflict with Russia. And anybody who does is enormously foolish. So a Russia hawk, Russia obsessive vote outweighs paving the way for war with a country that you know people around Trump are itching for war with. A war that, by the way, could happen. This is another thing with Russia that people on both sides of it are ridiculous about. It's highly unlikely, thank God, that there will be war with Russia. Both people who say the doomsday clock is ticking, I'm sorry, totally overblown. And people on the other hand who are like, if we don't stop, I mean, it starts with a hotel deal and then next week it's Red Dawn. It's bullshit.
Well, I remember having an argument about somebody with this on Twitter when they framed it as just Bernie voted against the Russia sanctions. This was at the time when there was a significant number of people acting like Tad Devine was going to be a big problem for Bernie Sanders.
Right.
And it was just clear, like, yeah, he didn't vote for that because of the Iran thing. And people don't even know that those are tied together.
That was one package. Only 2 members of the Senate. And God, you know I hate to do this, but Rand Paul voted against it. Voting to prevent the war, stopping the genocide in Yemen is the most important humanitarian thing because the United States is directly making that happen with the UAE and the Saudis. Stopping war in Iran is the most important geostrategic thing that can happen in the world today. I cannot emphasize how catastrophic that would be. Bernie Sanders voted against those sanctions. And incidentally, the second order point is I am not convinced, even though all of these candidates voted for the Iran deal when Obama put it forward, if they were in the Senate, and good for them, and they voiced support for the deal, but none of them have centered how catastrophic it is that Trump destroyed that deal and how profoundly dangerous that war is. Some of them are catching up a little bit now, but they have mostly been totally at ease, repeating AIPAC talking points, fear-mongering about Iran, and voting on a package that, even if you had a geopolitical fixation on Russia, isn't going to do a goddamn thing to dislodge that government. But for sanctions that, along with destroying that agreement, which, by the way, is an incredible legacy of Barack Obama, and I'm a hell of a lot more critical of Barack Obama than these other people, but I don't see where the hell is respecting his legacy on that. That's an incredible accomplishment. That's the greatest modern foreign policy accomplishment in the United States, Obama on Iran deal. So one sanctions package that Rachel Maddow, I guess, could get googly-eyed about on MSNBC, but another sanctions package that could lead to a war that would make Iraq look mild. That led to the deaths of millions of people. So that's a big distinction and a huge difference that people need to be real about with that. All right, now we got to get to the bad. I'm sorry, guys. Next week I'll take more calls. I apologize. We don't have time to take more calls. I'm sorry, but we will do that. Kyle, if you're listening, why did you reset this? We used to have this very elegant, simple phone system, and
not good. Believe me, not good.
Actually, yes, for both.
No good, really bad for you.
No good, really bad for you. So Pete Buttigieg, guys, have you heard that Pete Buttigieg is really smart?
Is he?
No, I've heard everybody's talking about how dumb he is.
That's so interesting because in the past couple of days, I feel like we finally flipped from he's so brilliant to is this guy fucking kidding me?
Yeah, I don't even remember the other part, actually.
I get that he speaks a lot of languages and some people are very obsessed with going to fancy schools. But one thing that Bernie Sanders needs to catch up on is a serious strategy to really in a broader sense, democratize the judicial system. Because the fundamental reality is that there is a incompatibility. You do need courts in any type of liberal context to safeguard certain things. But there's just been this extraordinary misconception. The left got complacent on voting for it on the Supreme Court. But on the other hand, I think the left also had a totally skewed view because they took a handful of important cases like Brown and Roe v. Wade, and then all of a sudden reverse engineered the overall historically profoundly reactionary nature of the Supreme Court, which is a very pro-capitalist, very socially moderate. When it's gone the right direction on vital issues like civil rights, there was a social movement behind it that set the context. This is not an institution that gets ahead on it. This is an institution that gave us Dred Scott. That being so, there needs to be a plan. And Pete Buttigieg has come forward with, I don't even, basically, there will be 15 people on the Supreme Court. 5 of them will be Democrats, 5 of them will be Republicans, and 5 of them will be independents, which will mean 2 things. Gridlock, 10-5 Republicans, and a huge amount, and consensus on things like corporations having more rights,
Absolutely.
labor unions being rolled back, and even, as I'm sorry, guys, Justice Ginsburg, who I do respect as a person. I do. I don't like the cult around her, but she's undeniably a hugely accomplished person who overcame massive hurdles. She just voted with the Republicans on one of the most obscene criminal justice decisions I've ever seen. So Pete Buttigieg's 21st century super high-tech innovation is more power and gridlock at the Supreme Court.
And even better than these 5 nonpartisan judges that will be appointed, they'll be appointed 2 years in advance and will only be on the bench for a year. So essentially creating like an intern class of like law clerks who do we even know if they're going to be able to, I mean, obviously this is not going to happen, but in his potential situation, that, would they even be appointed in the first place, right? Could you not imagine that 5-on-5 being able to come to some kind of consensus on what judges they're bringing into the court for 1 year? I mean, it's absolute disaster, not to mention the idea of cementing a 50-50 split and cementing the Republican Party in power, which we should, as the left, should be hoping to prevent and destroy.
I believe we have a clip that David Griscom dug up, which we can't explain. We can't even try to give you the merits of the Buttigieg plan because this is something that Joe Biden would find embarrassing. It is a innovative technical fix that will make the system actually profoundly more inefficient. It's a Rube Goldberg contraption to ensure Republican domination of the court. And I don't know, maybe get a backdoor donation from Howard Schultz. But we found a clip from maybe the worst television show ever made that we think just captures the ethos of Pete Buttigieg, the spirit of Pete Buttigieg.
Are you in favor of tax cuts for the wealthy?
I am not. I am in favor of tax cuts for those for whom it will do the most good. And that's a tough enough battle. And it looks like all of a sudden we've got a fair fight. But I'm not talking about policy. I'm talking about rhetoric, and the men you work for need to dial it down to 5. Henry, last fall, every time your boss got on the stump and said, it's time for the rich to pay their fair share, I hid under a couch and changed my name. I left Gage Whitney making $400,000 a year, which means I paid 27 times the national average in income tax. I paid my fair share, and the fair share of 26 other people. And I'm happy to, because that's the only way it's going to work. And it's in my best interest that everybody be able to go to schools and drive on roads. But I don't get 27 votes on election day. The fire department doesn't come to my house 27 times faster, and the water doesn't come out of my faucet 27 times hotter. The top 1% of wage earners of this country pay for 22% of this country. Let's not call them names while they're doing it, is all I'm saying.
This was a Democrat fantasy show. And Aaron Sorkin said last year that AOC doesn't understand politics. I think it's time to bring the gulag back as a segment. That's my conclusion. We need to bring the gulag back.
That's the first.
What a disgusting.
I've never seen West Wing before.
Stupid,
Oh, really? That was
embarrassing
your
show.
That's pretty good.
That's one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, and then people thought this was smart. It's like, wow, what a reasonable answer.
Like a guy like in the middle of that, oh my god, if I was writing that scene, I would have been like an 8-year-old when they're like making stories that make no sense, because I would have been storyboarding and I'd be like, and then he says 27 times hotter water, and then Fidel Castro came in and he shoots him in the leg, and then he takes him away, and then he goes to a prison and there's only cold water, and then he goes behind a wall. That's how I would have written it as an 8-year-old and a 35-year-old now.
The best part about this clip is, I don't know if this was a few years ago, but Rob Lowe during the 2016 election started freaking out at Bernie Sanders. It's like, why is he yelling at me? Why is he yelling at me? And he tweeted
because you're a fucking useless prick.
And he tweeted out this clip, and he's like, this message is still important today.
He should have his citizenship stripped. He should be, you know what? All right.
Was he Canadian?
No, he should just have his citizenship stripped. He's fucking useless. He's a grade B, like 80s actor bitching about his tax rate. I'm sorry. Rob Lowe's not putting points on the board. And West Winger Mazer D traction. All right. A few Discord questions. Reminder, the election of Queens District Attorney is fast approaching. If anyone watching can help Tiffany Caban get the word out, that would be great. We are trying to book Tiffany. She was going to be on next Tuesday, but there's a candidate for him. So I'm actually working on that. She seems to me a great candidate. Michael is saying that you can't vote out of fear. I don't get that one. I mean, I know where that comes from, but I don't know what's in relation to what I said. You heard about the new rules on U.S. immigrants and non-immigrant visas. Won't this destroy U.S. tourism? Knowing is going to go through the hassle of giving 5 years worth of social media history.
It's
you
also
guys heard about that? That's
it's also an attack on higher ed because those foreign students pay a lot of money to higher education.
That's right. Which they want.
Brett Weinstein's happy tonight.
Yes. Question from Tukers. Any thoughts on the idea of nationalizing the defense and arms industry? Could it end endless wars? I don't know if it could. I think that's something worth considering, though. I mean, I think, look, the fact that there is a global arms market. I mean, one of the main exports of the United States, as well as the United Kingdom, France, and China, are literally weapon systems, is an extraordinary thing. I mean,
and how inefficient a lot of these private contractors are, because they know that they have access to such a huge, basically blank check from the U.S. government. Andrew Coburn wrote a really good piece in Harper's this month that you should definitely check out on just how ridiculous the United States military-industrial complex is when it comes to just wasting money on $500 million toilet seats, stuff like that.
Right. Let's see, Mike. Any advice, guys, on dealing with the depression of living under capitalism? I mean, honestly, this is, what I think we need to start actually reframing like things like self-care and having fun and watching sports or going to the movies or taking a hike or whatever, and start to actually say, because maybe this will help people in the reframe, that to some extent those are outside of capitalism spaces and you should use them to recharge and rejuvenate yourself, because you're always implicated by it, but you're actually not always in it. There's tons of human interactions that are happening every day that are positive, that are in community, that are supportive, that are not in that context. And there's also things that, like, sure, I don't know, you can watch a tennis match or something. I mean, I love tennis, and I guess, the whole time I could focus on, the sponsors and the stadium and all of this. And yeah, that's all worth critiquing and thinking about. But watch the fucking game. It's great. It's very fun. And it's very good. humans are broad, interesting beings.
And within, all of your abilities, obviously there's constraints on this, but as much as you can resist the individualization, atomization that you're forced into through capitalism, through socializing with other people. I mean, socialism needs to be something that's social, and trying to look for those interactions outside of like the workplace, outside of being a consumer. Like that's something that's very important to find that kind of more natural state of human interaction.
It's incredibly important. Question: what is the impression of the social ecology strain of socialism? Anarchism, given its ideological preeminence in Rojava, as well as the strategic place within socialist movements in the Third World, given that it seeks to reduce state power and empower municipal governments and structures. I mean, I think that you need a real part of that ethos, because even just like the idea of workplace democracy, you could think of those as like, those are a lot of small decentralized democracies. But I guess, and I've actually even read, like I even love like E.F. Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. That was a big book in the 70s about scale and the fundamental problems with scale. I really like some of those ideas, but I'm not convinced that small is always necessarily better and local is somehow innately more enlightened. I actually also really
I think there's something really wrong about that in certain cases, yeah.
I like being global. I mean, one of the things, like when we even talk about individual consumption habits, like most of what we're going to do to deal with global warming is about structural design. But of course, it's going to implicate, like I do think at some point, I want people to have great living standards, and I don't like have air conditioning and good food and all of that. We're going to need to figure that out. But as an example, like, yeah, we're going to need to figure out to not live with cars. Like that is going to be a thing. And I think that you can make a life that's actually way better with incredible public transportation, all this type of thing. But like part of one area where I would just say, like, if we got the climate under control in terms of a crisis, in terms of the broad macro questions and upgraded fleets, but one way where it's just like, we're human beings and sometimes we leave a mark and that is what it is. Because I don't think we're just going to fold back into the woods. Like I'm not like a return to the primordial ecological womb person. I think that's both not realistic. I think in practice that actually creates a lot of environmental problems in and of itself. And it also tracks with some really reactionary ideologies. But like, I like what Lula said. I want everybody, as much people as possible at the airport. I want people to see other places, encounter other people, and really be global. Like, yeah. I actually really value that ethos. So I want some things to be large. I want some things to be very non-local. And I agree with Matt that some of the tendencies of that have some very sinister and world-closing undertones.
And like, if you look at, especially in the United States, like there has been such a fetish on the left in the worst periods of American left history. There was like, that was probably the dominant period of time for like very decentralized, always horizontal organizations. And if you think about something like, a city and then a farming community might decide it's okay to pour pesticides or their waste into the river that goes into a massive city. If you don't have a larger sense of community, you're not going to be able to deal with the kind of ecological questions that we have to face.
100%. All right, folks. I think that's
we have to make a quick note, and I don't know, people might not be able to get this, but Patreon is down.
Patreon is down.
Hopefully it'll come up in the next few hours.
But good.
Yeah, it's got maintenance, so.
All right, folks, Patreon is down. We'll get everything up for you. This Sunday, the primer is Capitalism versus Freedom with Rob Larson. Really, really interesting deep dive on histories of negative versus positive liberty, what freedom actually is, and why socialism is the way to deliver it. And we'll be back, of course, next week. Thanks, everybody.